as you're trying to turn that text into data, one of the most important things you can do for your reporting analysis is to properly categorize the contract. Because again, your objective, while you're looking at one contract right now, you want to standardize the categorization of your contract so that you can report and analyze and manage the risk of the entire portfolio in the future. There are many types of contracts, and there are many ways to even think about categorizing contracts. There are, for example, legal classifications and business classifications of contracts, and it can be easy to confuse them. So we have legal classifications where some body of law distinguishes the types of contracts we might be working on, and a lot of your internet searching about types of contracts is going to show these legal classifications. But in reality, what you probably care about more as a contract manager or someone who's charged with delivering value from managing the contract portfolio are business classifications that are relevant to your organization. So what might be some of those legal classifications? Well, one of the broadest ones in most common law jurisdictions is the idea of real property versus personal property. Real property is everything real estate related, and personal property is everything that can move around. Yes, there are some gray areas like fixtures, but this broad distinction between real property and personal property is a very common way of categorizing and thinking about contracts. In the US, there are government contracts. Again, that's a classification I've referred to earlier. It is an entire class of contracts. And even within government contracting, there are types of contracts, many, many types of contracts, and subcategorization is provided by a regulatory body. That might be true in your jurisdiction as well. The Uniform Commercial Code in the United States and in most jurisdictions in some form in the US distinguishes different types of contracts: sales contracts, lease contracts, security agreements, etc. So the UCC might provide some body of law that helps you categorize contracts. And then internationally, the United Nations Convention on Contracts for the International Sale of Goods also provides some categorization and classification of contracts. But again, these legal classifications, for the purpose of managing commercial contracts for business value, sometimes might not be so helpful. What we're really after are what kinds of categorizations will be useful for our business, regardless of the legal classification of the contract. So one of the most basic things to think about is, are these contracts revenue related or expense related? Knowing that and classifying that properly is really, really important. And of course, some contracts might be both. You might have ones where you are both having some services that you're delivering as well as product that you're purchasing. Those are at the margins, and classifying them as both revenue and expenses is valuable. But in most cases, you're going to have revenue-related contracts and expense-related contracts. Another big bucket is related to this real versus personal property is real estate contracts versus everything else. There's a lot more documentation and legal terms in many cases in those real estate contracts, and many organizations just put that in a separate bucket entirely right off the bat versus every other type of contracts. There might be regulatory types of contracts that require classifications. Business associate agreements in healthcare, for example, in the United States, often get flagged in contract management systems as their own type of contract because they're so important and there is a regulatory directive around those BAAs. But the most important thing is to develop a categorization that is tailored to your organization. If you do not own any real estate or lease any real estate in your organization, you probably don't need a real estate category in your contracts. But if you do a lot of intellectual property licensing, you will need many categories of licensing. It won't be enough to say this is a license. Is it a patent license? Is it a copyright license? Is it a trademark license? Is it a software license? Is it a license in, a license out? So all of these might be categories in your organization. But others, where licensing is not an important part of the business, might simply have one category called licensing. So again, tailor the development of your categories to your organization, and then take that one contract and put it in the right bucket. One of the most common categories for almost every organization is confidentiality. All the confidentiality agreements go in a bucket. So that NDA that we just talked about would go in the confidentiality category.